Minions are finally back in Season 6, and they are dealing tons of damage while being crazy tanky. And the best part is that this build comes online very easily. This version I'm going to show you is based around the Ring of Mendeln and buffing this thing to ridiculous proportions. And because of some changes to the game, it's actually super easy to get a Ring of Mendeln. Now, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the version of the build that I played before I had the Ring of Mendeln, just so you have something to play until then. But the main focus of this video will be on the Ring of Mendeln version. And like I said, I'll explain how you get the Ring of Mendeln very easily later. So, let's start with one of the coolest new pieces of the Minion build, which is Soul Rift. So Soul Rift is a new ultimate given to Necromancer that gives you ridiculous survivability through the form of barrier generation, gives you a 30% damage multiplier thanks to Supreme Soul Rift. It applies vulnerable to all enemies inside of it thanks to Prime Soul Rift, and as part of the base effect, it generates infinite resource. So this one ability gives you infinite resource, it gives you vulnerable, it gives you big damage, and it gives you a ton of survivability. And the best part is that Soul Rift is actually lower cooldown than Bone Storm, and you can get rolls on your gear to increase Soul Rift duration, as opposed to Army of the Dead, which doesn't have access to that. Overall, Soul Rift ends up making this build into an absolute masterclass of damage and survivability. The Ring of Mendeln has also been significantly buffed this season because it finally scales with minion damage. What that means is it works with stats like Skeletal Mage Mastery, which is a huge damage multiplier for your mages, and it works with the Ring of Mendeln. It also is going to work with things like Great Feast, which is going to give your minions a 45% damage multiplier, and that works with Mendeln. And on top of that, by the way, with Great Feast, the Essence Drain is paid for through Soul Rift, which is part of the value of Soul Rift, is it gives us access to another great damage multiplier. So, let's start by talking about the aspects and what different things on the gear make this build so powerful. So for starters, we're able to run the aspect of Hardened Bones. Now, in the final endgame version, you're probably going to replace this with like Harlequin or maybe the Pennant Helmet for a 60% damage multiplier. But right now, the extra survivability from Hardened Bones is absolutely phenomenal. Also, because it's a legendary helmet, we're going to get access to increased Soul Rift duration, and we can get armor and percent armor, which is going to be hugely helpful. The only thing I wish my helmet had was cooldown reduction, probably instead of maximum life. But honestly, 750 maximum life is an insane amount when my life pool is only 7,000 with all my HP multipliers. So, overall, Helmet does a lot of work. Now, we're also playing the Aphotic aspect. If you aren't familiar, the Aphotic aspect makes your warriors do shadow damage, which isn't why you play it. The reason why you play it is because it is bugged, and it actually causes your shadow warriors to proc Decrepify, specifically Abhorrent Decrepify, meaning that your shadow warriors' attacks will actually reduce your cooldowns. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you significantly better uptime on on Soul Rift. It's also going to give you better uptime on Corpse Tendrils, give you better uptime on Blood Mist, and all of that combined has crazy value. On top of that, we are also playing the Reaper Windup, now reduces your active cooldowns. So what this means is that whenever your warriors are attacking, they're going to be constantly reducing your cooldowns because they're proccing Decrepify, and they're going to have this wind-up attack that's going to reduce your cooldowns by 3 seconds. And remember, they do this once every 10 seconds. So basically, every Soul Rift, you're going to have 6 warriors that are all going to proc, and they're all going to reduce your cooldown by 3 seconds each for a total of 18-second flat cooldown reduction on Soul Rift. So you can see right now I'm at 31 seconds. 18 of those 31 seconds get shaved off just from my Reapers hitting stuff. Then we just have the base 12-second duration because of all the buffs. And you can see why it's so easy to get crazy uptime on Soul Rift. On the gloves, Skeletal Mage Mastery is by far the most important stat, and you need to look for this. Skeletal Mage Mastery is going to represent a ginormous damage increase that's going to buff you up like an entire torment level between your gloves and your pants. It is so important. And you might be wondering, well, you know, doesn't Mendeln buff all of your minions, right? Why are we specifically focused so much on mages and not the golem, right? I'm not even running the golem, nor do I have golem mastery on my chest. Helmet, no warrior mastery. Boots, no warrior mastery. Why are we focusing on the mages? Well, even though the Mendeln works with all of your units, you want to buff one as much as you can, and mages end up being the best target. The reason for this is because there's 5 mages, which is a lot more than the golem, and that you get 2 slots that you can roll Skeletal Mage Mastery on, whereas golem can only roll it on 1 for golem mastery. Warrior mastery is also much weaker than mage mastery, and the final thing that really puts mages ahead of warriors is you have so much more additive damage for mages than what warriors can get access to. Now, just because of the raw amount of multipliers, your warriors are still going to be doing decent damage in this build, but it's much better to fully focus in on the mages and buff them as much as you can, and then get your survivability where you would normally be buffing the warriors. Now, one thing you're going to notice on my gloves, which is kind of weird, is that I rolled on spiked armor. This isn't necessarily required, and you don't necessarily need to do it for armor cap, but I did it in this case because at the time that I had the gloves, I couldn't get to armor cap, and on gloves, you can only roll utility and offense, but you can actually roll spiked armor onto utility for your utility rolls to gain access to more armor, despite the fact that, it's a utility slot. You're not supposed to get armor from it. Now, at this point, I'm already at armor cap, and I ended up having to remove points from spiked armor, but effectively, this is like 2 ranks of blood mist, which is giving me increased blood mist cooldown, so it ends up being pretty okay. Pants. Skeletal Mage Mastery. So important. And int and max life are also fantastic, and then total armor, and then corpse tendril size. I cannot overstate how important corpse tendril size is. Corpse tendril size is going to almost double the speed at which you clear dungeons, because it's going to take it from covering a very small portion of the screen to covering a huge portion, if not the whole screen. This means all those range mobs that sit just outside of the range of your corpse tendrils are going to start getting pulled, and it's going to give you so much more ability to group mobs and burst them down very easily. The damage of this build is very tightly focused, and the more scattered the mobs are, you lose so much damage. Because, if you have a pack of 10 mobs and then you have one mob like way off to the side, your mages will attack the mob way off to the side instead of the big group. And they're going to be hitting it, and they're not going to be doing much damage because it's not going to have your soul rift on it. That mob might not be cursed. It might not have the corpse tendrils on it for grasping veins, and you end up losing a ton of damage. So it's super important. Get corpse tendril size roll. Super, super important. And on my pants, I am playing Juggernaut to get access to the armor. Final version of the build, maybe not Juggernaut, but for now, absolutely needed. Boots. I love a resist all roll. This resist all roll can also come from your chest piece. Both places are great. And I'm also running movement speed, which I think is absolutely required, and maximum life. I wish this maximum life was intelligence, but I'm okay with my current boots. They're pretty good. And then for our temperings, we're going to temper on movement speed and corpse tendril size. Now remember, corpse tendril size is capped at 100%. So when you're deciding where to roll your utility your utility tempering, the first thing you want to do is get 2 utility temperings for corpse tendril size, maybe even 3 if you really want to, and then for the rest, put on soul rift duration. That's how I would treat it. It doesn't matter what slot you put on your utility temper, like which utility temper, just make sure you get at least 2 rolls of corpse tendril size. For aspect of running Occult Dominion, of course, because, the extra minions is more damage, and it's also, remember, because of the new Callan's Edict, it ends up being even more damage, because we get increased damage for every active minion, so having 4 extra minions is 12% damage and 12% attack speed. Attack speed is so important in this build, and it's one of the tightest things, and it's something that you really need to focus on. So, why is attack speed so important? Remember, this is all coming from the Cult Leader Legendary node. This Legendary node is going to give you a 40% damage multiplier per 20% attack speed that you have, capping all the way at 100% attack speed. This means you're going to get a total of 200% multiplicative damage based on your attack speed. It is not optional. You have to hit 100% attack speed. You can see currently I am at, you add your attack speed bonus with your minion attack speed, I'm at 37.9%. And then, because of Callan's Edict, I'm getting an extra 33%, which puts me just over 100% at 100.9%. Now, if you're not my Paragon level and you don't have fairly decent gear, you will not be able to hit that with the legendary aspects I'm currently playing, but this problem is crazy easy to fix. All you have to do is either replace Great Feast or replace Reanimation. Either one is fine. It just depends on your exact setup and stuff, which one you prefer to replace. Basically, what it's really based on is which one you have a better roll, right? Like if you have a 45 Reanimation roll and only a 30 Great Feast roll, then replace the Great Feast, right? But we're going to be replacing that with Aspect of Frenzy Dead, which is going to give your minions a ginormous attack speed buff and will make it super easy to hit the attack speed cap. But overall, number of minions is super important, attack speed is super important, and that's how you solve those 2 issues. Now, for my weapon, I am currently playing Grandfather, which I'm pretty sure is best in slot, and it absolutely destroys. With Soul Rift version, it is absolutely best in slot. Grandfather slaps. But I just got this, and I've been farming World Tier 4 for a long time. What I was doing before was I was actually playing Great Feast on a weapon, then I was playing the Aspect of Frenzy Dead on my gloves. And that's exactly how it worked, right? And that's how I got to attack speed cap while being able to play the build. So around the time you start farming Mythic Uniques is around the time we're going to start solving this attack speed problem. Once you get there, go ahead and run Grandfather. But until you get there, just put Great Feast or put Reanimation on your 2-handed weapon, whichever one you have a better roll of. Slap Frenzy Dead on your gloves, and you're going to be able to farm Tier 4. just like I was. Necklace, also very important. You want Hellbent Commander very badly. Now, it's very hard to find a Hellbent Commander necklace, but you absolutely want it. Percent intelligence is also great. Instead of intelligence, you can get amplified damage, you can get fueled by death. There's a lot of good options for what to run here. Just look for some multiplicative damage. Even crit chance is pretty good. And then I also like to run attack speed. Now, if you're still wearing Frenzied Dead, you don't need attack speed. But in this setup, once you start to optimize it, you're probably going to need the attack speed on your amulet. We're also going to be looking to temper on ultimate cooldown reduction, and then we're also looking for skeletal mage damage. The Ring of Mendeln, the cornerstone of the build. What stat is the most important? By far, the ranks of Skeletal Mage Mastery, Warrior Mastery, Golem Mastery. That is the best stat, but honestly, Minion attack speed is also pretty good, and intelligence is also pretty good. You should be happy if you get any of these greater affixes. They're going to give you a lot of extra stats, but your best option is the Mage and Golem Mastery. Now, the most important thing on the weapon is going to be the secondary roll. This is going to be much more important than which stat gets the greater affix, right? Because the secondary roll is huge. Right now, I'm missing out on a whopping 10% multiplicative damage from the loss on the secondary roll, which is a really big deal. So, overall, when you're looking for an item, look for the highest rolled secondary you can, and then get an Ancestral with one of those three stats. GA'd, ideally, the Mage Mastery. And when you're upgrading, all three stats are good, but you're going to be looking for Mastery for your Masterworks. For the other ring, I currently have Golem damage because I got screwed. I really need to replace this ring. I've just been super lazy. This ring is so bad, actually. I didn't even realize how bad this ring was. But what you're going to be looking for is int, crit chance, and then either maximum life or attack speed, depending on what you want. Getting attack speed on this ring can make it a little bit easier to hit your attack speed cap. But the maximum life rolls, like, because your base life is so low right now, a maximum life roll on the ring, like right now you can see I'm at right around 7,000. If I take this off, I go from 7,000 down to 6,400, which is a 10% life loss. So this maximum life roll is a 10% survivability increase. That is huge, right? So I love having maximum life on my ring, but you know, you can flip that to crit and you can roll the damage to, the flat damage is the worst stat though. That's what you really want to get rid of. And then obviously not Golem Mastery, you want mage damage. And then you want ultimate cooldown reduction for better uptime. And on here, we're slapping on the Aspect of Reanimation for big damage. Now, if you don't have the Ring of Mendeln, the solution is really simple. Just replace this with a ring with Fell Gluttony on it, and it's going to make it so whenever you activate your Golem, it's going to deal a load of damage. And then all you got to do is roll Golem cooldown reduction as a tempering on both your rings and your amulet, which will be really cheap on low quality gear, and it's going to make it so you're doing loads of damage even without the Ring of Mendeln. But, like I mentioned, the Ring of Mendeln is super easy to get through the use of opals. You can buy rings from the opal vendor for only 50 opals a piece, and the drop rate of the Ring of Mendeln is actually crazy high. This is how I got my first Ring of Mendeln, shortly after I hit level 60, just by sending opals at this vendor. So overall, these aspects, the stats that we're getting, focused around maximizing our damage while getting enough survivability to clear the content. And we need to get to resistance cap, we need to get to armor cap, both these things are super important. Get whatever single resistance rolls you need to get the job done. Get whatever armor rolls you need. The most important thing on your gear is first to hit resistance and armor cap. Then it's to get all the offensive stats I talked about. And then it's to get the defensive stats. And remember, Ancestrals, while they are better, are super expensive to work with. They cost so many materials. So oftentimes, it's actually better to get non-ancestral good items than it is to get ancestral good items. Because you can't even afford to masterwork ancestral items because it's so freaking expensive, especially when you're farming Torment 3. So overall, you should be pretty happy if you get a well-rolled normal legendary instead of ancestral. But there's a couple more things we really need to talk about with this build, starting with Runewords. Now, if you're not fully familiar with how the Runewords system works, it's pretty simple. It's just a cause and an effect, and the cause, in this case, I'm playing whenever you become injured or crowd controlled, and then the effect is you're going to automatically cast Barbarian Challenging Shout for 40% damage reduction. And because the becoming injured or crowd control gives you so many points, it's actually going to give you a 7.5 second duration on a 40% damage reduction. Every time you get crowd controlled, every time you become injured, you get 40% damage reduction. And that 40% damage reduction is ridiculously strong when paired with the barrier generation on Soul Rift, and it's going to give you a ginormous effective HP pool. This is an incredibly powerful combination that will take you from struggling to survive to being almost completely unkillable. The other combination we're running is something that might get cut later in the build as we get more crit chance and as my gear becomes better, but for now, this is amazing. Bakgar, which is going to make it so whenever we travel 5 meters, we're going to get a stacking 2.5% crit buff. This crit buff stacks all the way up to 25%, and every time I walk 5 meters, it resets all of the stacks. This is just a straight 25% crit chance multiplier. Obviously playing Grandfather, so this is a 25% multiplier just from the Grandfather. Then crit has a built-in 50% multiplier, and then we're sacrificing the Golem for another 35% crit multiplier. And all those multipliers are multiplicative with each other. So this is a huge damage increase. You need to get to crit cap with this build. It's super important, and this Runeword combination allows you to get there much easier, especially when you combine it on the skill tree with Inspiring Leader, which is going to give your minions 18% crit chance. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire skill tree because a lot of this stuff is just old school standard minion stuff, but I do want to tell you about some super important things that have changed and some things that are going to massively increase your power if you're aware of, starting with Reap. Now, we've always loved Reap in minion builds because of the corpse generation, but now Reap is also going to give us a ginormous 15% damage reduction for 4 seconds after we use Reap. You actually want to start using Reap every 4 seconds to keep up that 15% damage reduction. That is a huge deal. Then, because of Enhanced Reap, whenever we kill an enemy after it gets Reap, we get a 30% attack speed increase that's going to hit our minions. This is actually a huge damage increase, and it's really important. After you corpse tendrils and pull a pack together, you want to use Reap on it so that as you start to kill them, because you're going to kill the white mobs before you kill the elites, right? And when your minions kill the white mobs, they're going to get this 30% attack speed buff to kill the elites with. Very big deal. Here you can see the effect of my current Skeletal Mage Mastery, which is a 260% damage multiplier. This is insane, and you can start to see why it's so important to get ranks of Skeletal Mage Mastery on all of your pieces of gear that can get it, which again, remember, pants, gloves, and ring of men down. Very important to get the highest roll possible. On our Corpse Tendrils, we're playing Blinded Corpse Tendrils because it's going to generate Blood Orbs, and then we're going to be able to pick up the Blood Orbs, and we're going to be getting a massive 50% damage buff as long as we can sustain the Blood Orbs. Now, realistically, this is going to end up being more like 25 or 30% damage. It's really hard to keep this buff up in this build, but 25 or 30% damage is a big deal. So this ends up being a huge amount of damage. Because remember, we don't need the Vulnerable because we're getting Vulnerable from Soul Rift. It's part of what makes Soul Rift so good, is that it allows us to play Blinded Corpse Tendrils. Next, let's talk about the Mercenaries, because the Mercenary for this build is actually pretty strong. So we're going to be playing Raher, I guess is how you say that. And Raher is going to give us a whopping 15% resist all, which makes it significantly easier to hit resistance caps. Remember, as you go up in Torment difficulties, you're going to get huge reductions in your resistances and your armor, so it's very important to keep that in mind and to try to get as much resistance and armor as you can. This is going to be one of the main bottle gates that's going to prevent you from progressing to higher world tiers. We're also going to be playing Bastion with Inspiration to give us a nice 25% damage multiplier whenever it's up. This effect isn't super strong, but we're mostly playing Raher for the 15% resist all. For our Paragon board, I'm not going to go super in depth with it. I'm just going to give you the quick TLDR of the super important stuff. So on our first board, we're going to be grabbing Dead Razor for this huge damage multiplier. And by the way, the board that you're going to see linked in the description is not going to look like mine. My board is an amalgamation mess that I put together while leveling, but the glyphs are going to be the same, the legendary nodes are going to be the same, but the board in the description is going to look different than this board. It's going to be way more optimized, okay? But for starters, we're going to be playing the Dead Razor glyph, which is going to give us a 15% damage multiplier. We're playing Cult Leader, of course, right? This legendary node for 200% damage, which is ginormous. We're picking up Corporeal for movement speed and physical damage. Remember, yes, our mages are doing shadow damage, but the Ring of Mendeln is the damage of this build. Corporeal giving you movement speed and giving you a great multiplier is huge. And, 11% movement speed is nothing to scoff at. I also want to mention on this board, because I love this, is picking up Infused Caster for the 100% additive damage. I think that's a neat little thing, and it's quite a bit of damage. We're also running Flesh Eater for a 40% damage multiplier after we eat enough corpses. Now, it's important to note, the corpse consumption of this build is very different than traditional minion builds, because in normal builds you're going to have Army of the Dead, or you would be playing with the Reapers that generate corpses, but in this build we're actually playing neither. We're relying very heavily on Reap to generate corpses, and this is only going to happen once every 4 seconds. It's important. After you Reap, Corpse Tendrils, then cast Raise Skeleton to get the Skeletal Priest buff. The reason is because Corpse Tendrils isn't going to consume the corpse. So with one corpse, you can activate both of your effects. Once things start to die and you start to get corpses, then you want to start spamming Raise Skeleton for Flesh Eater. But this build This setup does have a little bit of nuance to it where you will be more focused on corpse management than traditional minion builds. Now, I also want to talk about these new rare nodes because I have been asking for this literally since the launch of the game, and they finally did it, which is adding maximum resistance to these nodes. So we're going to get some maximum poison resistance, and we're also going to get some maximum shadow resistance, which is pretty cool. Next, we're playing the Eliminator Glyph because it's going to give us quite a bit of damage against elites, while also giving us a decent amount of stats. We're going to be playing Frailty, which is going to give us a 40% multiplier against most things, because most mobs are going to live a few seconds, because our ramp time is actually fairly long. You got to get in, you got to get the corpse tendrils out, and then, by then your Frailty's running, and you're going to get a lot of damage. We're playing Amplify for another 10% plus, 6.1. So this is pretty strong. And finally, we're going to be playing Blood Begets Blood for the 50% multiplier. And we're going to be pairing that with the Control Glyph once, you get enough Paragon points, which is giving you another ginormous, baseline, 20 and 8% multiplier against card-controlled enemies. And because our Decrepify applies a slow, all enemies, which is pretty fantastic. Overall, minions are absolutely phenomenal this season. They're super fun to play. They do crazy damage. And I'm so happy the minions are back. I hope you guys enjoy the build. Let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, everybody.